Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Alan Hewitt from Earthstar Publishing, and it's a great pleasure to have you here with us today. I'll bring on in a moment our special guest, Paul Counsel, and he'll take us about Paul. At age 40, Paul Counsel was dead flat broke. Paul had worked for years to build a reputation as an artist, and even though he was showing his work in major galleries and exhibitions, including the Festival of Perth, he was barely scraping by. But all that changed when Paul discovered the key to mastering his financial future. In fact, once Paul unlocked his own money code, his life changed almost overnight. In less than 4 years, he made his first $1 million. That's right, Paul went from dead flat broke to millionaire in just 3 years and 8 months. Today, Paul owns multiple businesses and enjoys a fantastic quality of life. The freedom his financial success has given him let Paul discover his true life's purpose. It gave him the space to form stronger, deeper, more intimate relationships with the people he loves. And over the last 15 years, it's given him the ability to do what he is passionate about, which is to help thousands of others crack their own personal money code. And I have to say that I've had the absolute pleasure over the last few months to work very closely with Paul. And I'll now bring him onto the screen. So are you with us there, Paul?
I am, and look, thanks very much for that kind introduction. It's great.
Excellent. Well, look, we've had some excellent questions being submitted. Paul, look, let me just read some of these questions that sort of talk about the money code. So we have, what do I need to do to crack the money code? What is the fastest, most effective way to change your money mindset? What factors count most for a dead broke person to revive their fortunes? Tell us about your money code. How can we change our financial future and stop living paycheck to paycheck? What is the common thread for the thousands of people whose money code you have cracked over the last 15 years? So you can see there's a theme there. So Paul, take it away.
It's a great array of questions, and I think the first, the first thing to realize is, in fact, everybody actually has a money code. It's often the case, though, that most people don't understand that they've got a money code, and even if they did understand it, they're not quite sure how it actually functions. And so the easiest way for people to understand that they've got a money code operating is to basically ask a couple of questions. And the first question is to try and understand how much you have personally earned since you have either been in the workforce or since you have left school. Now, we don't have to make that an exact science, but each individual on the call, try and get some sort of assessment going of how much you have actually earned since you started earning money, let's say. Now, I'll give you an example of asking this question of a young couple that I met with just recently, and pretty much I asked the same question. Okay, so individually, how much have you earned since you have been in the earning money phase of your life? And the gentleman thought for a moment, and he did a sort of a quick bit of arithmetic in his head, and he said, about $1 million. And so the lady did a little bit of a quick arithmetic. She was a bit younger, and she said, about $300,000 in total. And then I asked them, okay, so that's 1.3 million. And again, this was a young couple. I said, now how much of that money do you actually have left? And they did a little bit of quick arithmetic, and it was zero. In fact, it was less than zero, because then they realized that they had some money on a credit card, and then they had some money on some personal loans. So in actual fact, it was a negative sum, negative to the tune of about $33,000. And so that is what I mean by a money code, because nobody would voluntarily or consciously put themselves into that position of earning $1.3 million and yet ending up in debt to the tune of $33,000. So there's a clear code around money that's operating within those individuals, and it's often a shock to the system to say, well, hang on, where is all of that money gone? Now, that's sort of neither right nor wrong, good nor bad. What's really amazing is that most people don't know that that's a very, very strong code that's operating. And a code is simply a system of rules or a system of laws. And so people have internal systems going on around money. Now, at the other end of the extreme, you can ask wealthy people, how much money have you earned over your lifetime? And they will have more money than they have actually physically earned through their labor, because they would have taken that money and they would have made investments and grown that money and then got a decent return on that, either through business. So they have a different money code operating. So that's the first thing that we want to really know, is that everybody has a money code. Not everybody knows what that money code is. But the other thing about it is that you have to move from a position of, let's say mild struggle or a bit of a struggle, to a position of economic freedom. You've literally got to change the code. Because if you don't change the code, what continues to work away is the very code that actually got you to the position that you're in. And so if you think about changing the code, that has to be a deliberate act. It has to be a deliberate act of learning. It has to be a deliberate act of determination. It has to be a deliberate act of awareness. And it has to happen over time, because it's not going to change tomorrow. And so that's exactly what I discovered. I discovered that, I had been pursuing exactly the same system as everybody else. I was dead flat broke at the age of 40. I'd been working for 26 years. Up until that stage, I was well credentialed. I was well qualified. I had a large following in my artistic world, but I didn't realize that my code was based on, the code that most Australians have it based on, which means that, at some point in their life, they're going to be minus rather than positive. And so for me, it was about changing that code around, and, the rest is pretty much history. Now, there was a second question that you asked there that it was the last one. What do I have to do?
Let me just review that again. I think it was what is the common thread for the thousands of people whose money code have you cracked over the last 15 years? Is that the one?
Okay, so yes. And so once I actually share that knowledge of codes within people, and once they actually get it, that they've got a code and they're following it, but they also get that code is often what we call implicit. In other words, they can't actually describe it themselves. And so what we do is make that implicit code explicit. So we're going to map it out, and it's based on 3 money mindsets. And that's the mindset of the only way that you get money is to work for it. And as soon as you get money, you've got to spend it. And if you can't spend it because you haven't got enough money, then you can borrow it. And again, when you lock into those 3 money mindsets of earn, spend, borrow, that's the code that's operational. And if you stay in that code, then, the results are always negative. And so over a process of time, I take people through that code of, let's say, worker. Now, worker has a code, and it's generally the code of earn, spend, and borrow. Borrow for non-productive purposes. And I help them change that code into, let's say, something that's actually more enterprising. And once they actually get the idea that they can start to enterprise their way to financial freedom, and then they carry the skill set, which means that they can build other codes on top of that, such as an entrepreneur series of codes, then, basically the world becomes exactly what they want it to be, because they've got the space and the time and the money to do it. And so that's that classic thing with, who I work with is taking people and transitioning them away from that worker code or that money code that's based on non-productivity into a code that's based on productivity.
Okay, cool. So, I guess the questions that sort of come up next after that, although there was actually another one that might relate there. Yeah, look, I think really, perhaps people like to know about sort of examples. So there's quite a few questions on, well, how did you make that change? And how did you make your wealth?
So the first starting point is to actually understand there was a code operating. And then to say, well, okay, now who has got a code that has results in terms of the way that I would actually like the results? So basically I looked at millionaires. Now, what do millionaires do differently than what I was actually doing for the first 40 years of my life? Well, they actually have a different code. So the first thing I learned is what that code actually is. And again, it's based on enterprise, and it's based on entrepreneurialism, and it's based on a whole lot of things. And so, okay, so then I started to develop that within myself. Now, once you actually get the code sorted out, you then need a medium. And in Australia, we have around about 7 mediums that you can gain wealth through. You know, real estate is a medium, business is a medium. You know, there are several mediums. You know, the market is a medium. And so it's now becoming skilled in one or two or a number of those mediums. And so I started with the medium called real estate. I understood the code. I built a better code. And then I started to do things within that medium that actually fitted the way that my personal psychology is arranged. And that's, you know, we can get onto that in a later topic, but I understood that I had to match the medium to the way that my internal cognitive processes, so that I could get the best leverage from myself, and I wasn't going to do anything that would self-sabotage. So I started off with real estate, and I became very, very energized, and I did all forms of real estate, but the first thing was to, you know, buy something, do it up, get the equity out of it, and then repeat that process over and over again. And, you know, that's what I've been teaching people now for the past 15 years, how to exactly start that. And then that went on for about 2 years. And then I started to really understand the mind of Warren Buffett, and the way that his intelligence worked, and the way that his code worked, and the way that medium that he uses started to work. And so I started to learn everything that I could about that. I moved into that, and that was the sum total of those experiences that took me from, you know, broke to millionaire in 3.8 years. And one of the secrets about that, though, is that it comes with a rush at the end. It doesn't come with a rush at the beginning, because you've got to be planting a whole lot of seeds and learning a whole lot of things. And so it's a little bit like a compound curve. And the formula that I tell people is that you get the first 50% of gain, but it takes 90% of the time. But you get the last 50% of gain in 10% of the time, because now you've really ratcheted up and you've planted seeds and everything is in place, and then you let market forces, you know, take over. And if you don't work that way, then, you know, there's a chance that you'll go the other way.
Well, I actually think I think that's a good thing to sort of pick up on there, because there was 2 or 3 questions that sort of were along the lines of, you know, how do I focus on one plan? I keep thinking of new ideas and I don't complete anything. Or what is in us when we know what we have to do but we just don't do it? And there's another one that's a little bit similar. How does one start with an idea and stick to it? You know, they seem to be picking up these themes of, well, maybe they're, you know, how do they stay with it for that 50% where they don't feel that they're doing, you know, getting a lot of traction?
Yeah, and that often has to do with the way that their particular form of genius is actually set up. And just to explain that a little bit, and this is based on the work of Carl Jung, so if anybody is familiar with his work, we actually have a system for the way that we make sense of the world, and we call that system perception. But not many people know that there are literally 4 styles of perception. And then we have a system for making judgments about what we understand in our world, and that's called judgment or decision making. And so we have 4 different styles of decision making and 4 different styles of perceiving or perception. Now, the importance about that is that each individual has a different style, and one that's actually unique to them. And so sometimes we have an idea, and an idea might sort of flash out from nowhere. It might come through, you know, intuition. And intuition is actually a style of perception. But intuition doesn't really put the nuts and bolts of anything together. And so unless you're well versed in another form, let's say your second, your brain has a preference, and so unless you're well versed in a second form of perception, which means that you're able to stay on the narrow and you're able to focus for a long time and get all those steps in the right way and get them in the right sequence at the right time, then what happens is that your perception basically goes to another series of possibilities. And you keep jumping from one series of possibilities to another series of possibilities to another series of possibilities without getting any traction in anything. And so, if that's the case for people, then they need to engage in a process or engage in some form of support where they can have their ideas analyzed and tested. And if they come up trumps, in other words, it's a fertile idea, it's a good idea, then they need to be supported through that process to, transform it from an idea into the physical reality or the physical expression of that idea. And unless they've got that support in, then again, just their natural form of perception is going to have them keeping on jumping from one to the other to the other to the other. And they will always be spinning their wheels unless they get that solid support in. And so there's a we call that sort of we in the psycho sort of analysis field, we actually call that your inner genius. And so the first thing you want to do is work out what form of inner genius you have, and then things start unfolding in a structured way from that point. But if you don't know what form your genius takes or what form your perception takes, then it's actually hard to do it.
Yeah, and it occurred to me that if people were listening to to what you said about how you became wealthy, okay? Mm-hmm. So you outlined a strategy that you used predominantly, buying real estate, doing it up and reselling it, and you're following Warren Buffett's methodologies. And so I guess they might or have a tendency to conclude, hey, that's the way that Paul built wealth, therefore it's the way that I should build wealth. But that's what you're saying is that in fact how people build wealth is actually dependent on their particular form of genius. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Because if you just sort of step back from everything and you say, well, now how many wealth educators are there on the marketplace? How many books are there? How many seminars are there? How many webinars are there? How many CDs can they pick up on it? How many? And it's ad infinitum. Now, then you say, well, now how many people have actually made the journey from, let's say being stuck to this position of financial freedom? And there's always a minority. There's always a minority that actually, despite any amount of people doing study and going to seminar after seminar after seminar, the biggest myth that's actually told is that anybody can do anything. And it's actually not true. Because unless you match your wealth medium, let's say, to the way that your mind is actually set up, or the cognitive drivers of those minds are set up, you're going to self-sabotage every single time, and you are going to lose more money than actually make money. So I'm really passionate about that people match it up in the right sequence, and it's the right sequence for them. And the other thing about that is that if you have a look at the economic conditions where when I started out, and then the economic conditions today, they're just chalk and cheese. And so we always have to be cognizant of, well, hang on, what's the right medium? What's the best fit medium for my particular cognitive drivers? And then what part of the economic cycle are we in, and is it the right time for that medium in this particular part of the economic cycle? And I go to great lengths of explaining that when I'm obviously sitting there face to face with people throughout let's say a day or a weekend seminar, because if you can match it up and that's fine, but we might be in the wrong part of the cycle, so we need to go to a different strategy. Or if we're in the right part of the cycle but we mismatch, you're going to basically not do as well as you had hoped or anticipated. And so, and again, there's some very, very clear, research on this, and I think that people really need to be supported, because if they don't, then if they make if they make a mistake, or if they get a result that they perhaps misinterpreted, then they don't get up again and have another go, or they go from idea to idea to idea, and they don't actually change the codes that's actually driving the whole system.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense to me, and I also want to just encourage people to ask questions. We've got I think about 25 people online at the moment, which is great. But feel free to, if something sparks your interest there, please feel free to ask a question. But I also wanted to let people know that in terms of, Paul mentioned about the sort of seminars and so on that he runs. There is one here in Perth called Money Mastery Discovery on November 24, and that's a full day. And there's a link down the bottom of the page that you can click on if you're interested in that. And that can either be attended live, or we're going to do a live cast of the event similar to this. So if you're not in Perth, that is an option for you. I mean, obviously, if you're in Perth, I would highly recommend you come along, because you get to hang out with Paul and the rest of the people there, and it's obviously a better option. But the live cast is something that we're going to offer this time. But anyway, let me sort of maybe try and put that into a bit of context in terms of other ways that people, or another analogy, and then we've got a question there, and we'll go to that. But if you think about this matching of wealth, and you think about the sporting field, right? So you've got these, say, Olympic athletes, and you've got the swimmers, and you've got the runners, and you've got the sumo wrestlers. I think that's an Olympic sport. But you know what I mean, is that firstly you've got people with different types of bodies, and I think these swimmers have these huge feet, and there's a certain physiology that they have, and the runners similar, and then the sumo wrestlers, well, obviously, they're not going to be a great runner anytime soon. So I guess that's the first thing. It seems to me that it's quite similar in that sense.
Yes.
And yeah. And that makes sense.
Actually it's a great metaphor, an absolutely fantastic metaphor. And the thing about when you use this sporting analogy, we've got so much training that kind of sort of shovels us into one or the other, because we can start with junior athletics and we can work out. You get lots of experimentations, but when it comes to money, there is really only one predominant code that's actually imprinted and inculcated and enculturated into people's mindset, which is basically the code of a worker code, which means earn, spend, and borrow for non-productive purposes. But great analogy.
Yeah, and I think certainly there are the people I know, and I guess people who have children will know that they can have their kid try different sports, and some of them they'll just be hopeless at. And then they'll find the one that's right for them, and they're away, and they love it, and they're into it. Yeah.
Well, look, if you take Warren Buffett, if Warren Buffett tried to do, let's say, trading, he would probably not be as wealthy as he is today, because he actually knows what he's really good at, and he sticks to it. If he tried to go out and let's say, do some internet marketing or something like that, if he chose a different vehicle, he wouldn't be Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett has an absolute skill set. He has cognitive drivers. He matches everything to his particular strengths. He understands his strengths because he's done so much work around it, and he sticks. I think there's a term where you stick to your knitting.
Absolutely, and I think he really knows that. He knows what he should be doing and what he shouldn't be doing. It's quite clear, and I think it's really worth, if we're going to talk about Warren Buffett for a sec, and not everyone will be into this, but we also know that he lives in the same house that he, originally had, whatever, before he's wealthy 40 years ago, drives a very modest car. In other words, his money code is not spend more than I earn. In fact, it's nowhere near that. I mean, it's almost a ridiculous gap the other way, isn't it?
Absolutely, and what that indicates is that he can make greater contributions because he's actually free of the trap of money. So he's not caught up in that sort of status anxiety process of looking over and comparing and so he's very much his own person, And look, he's extremely comfortable, but in that is actually freedom. And, that's why I say that, you want to master your money code so that you get both personal and economic freedom, because one without the other is really no freedom at all.
Absolutely. And if we come back to the sporting analogy just for a moment before we go to this question, is that it's pretty clear that there's no top athlete ever that got there without continual coaching. And in fact, a lot of the times where they come a cropper is where they, ditch a coach for another one that doesn't suit them or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, Warren Buffett credits Benjamin Graham, and if he didn't have a Benjamin Graham in his life, there wouldn't be a Warren Buffett. And so he's very, very clear about that. And if you think about anybody who wants to excel at any level beyond, let's say, the average or the normal or the whatever, then there's a lot of potential that they have that they can't access themselves. And that's why they need some sort of coach or some sort of mentor or some sort of external feedback mechanism to engage that potential and draw that potential out of them. So people could do so much more if they were only able to allow that potential to come out. But, then they have all sorts of fears and beliefs and things that sort of pop up like pop-up windows. And, of course, that knocks them out of the game. And, again, that just goes back to that's their money code.
Yep, absolutely. Well, anyway, let's go to this question. So if my inner genius doesn't match the cycle, what then? Do I wait or do I retrain my inner genius?
No, you don't wait. It's not your inner genius matching the cycle. It's your inner genius matching the medium that is suitable for the cognitive processes of your genius. Now, in any given cycle, there's a gazillion ways to actually make money. There's never a shortage of mediums. There's never a shortage of opportunities. There's only an inability to see those opportunities or an inability to connect to those opportunities in a very, very skillful and meaningful way. So once we understand what part of the cycle we are in, then there will be some mediums that are suitable for that and other mediums that are not suitable for that. But once we actually know what your genius is, and then we can start matching those two and then support you through the processes that you need to be supported in terms of imprinting or embedding a new money code, then you've got the best of everything that you possibly need.
And I guess a question that's probably going to be coming up in people's mind is saying, well, you're talking about this genius code, or not genius code, sort of an inner genius. But how do you actually find out what your inner genius actually is? How do you do that?
Well, I can do a very, very simple online test. And, there are any amount of them available. The one that I access and the one that I work with people through is a very insightful look at what sits underneath personality. And again, it's a very, very simple, takes about, depends on how quick you are, somewhere between 20 and 40 minutes. It's easily accessible. They go online, they do it, a report is generated, a 15-page report is generated. But the secret is in now sitting down with, somebody such as myself that can make that report actually come alive for people. It's like anything. You can give a person the training manual, you can give a person the instruction manual, but there's very few people that can make the manual actually come alive so that they, the person that's reading it, can actually understand it. And, that needs to be built in over time. Otherwise, the manual's, meaningless. We don't come with an instruction manual for life, but we can get an instruction manual for wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. There are all the books in the. You've got lots of books there behind you. I'm sure people at home have got lots of books, but nevertheless, they're not necessarily any further along the track, because it's very. It's one thing to read it in a book. It's another thing to actually put it into practice.
I've written 5 books now, and I can honestly say that if a person has read my book or any of my books, the level of conversation that we can actually have together is so much more insightful and so much more in-depth than we could if you actually hadn't read the book. And yet most people say that they don't have time. And so it's like the manual. They don't have time to read the manual. But it's not that difficult. It's just now a determination and a commitment to start changing your codes. And again, the only way you can change your codes is to make a commitment to learn not only about your code so that you can make what they call implicit explicit, so that we can have language around it and so we can talk about it, so we can point to it, but then to now learn new codes that are based on enterprise and based on a little bit more adventurous. And I'm not talking about high risk anything here. I'm talking about changing the mental processes that are actually driving your results. Because if you don't, then they're going to continue to drive your results.
Absolutely. Okay, well let's move to some other questions here. I'll just try and get some here that are, I mean, I guess we need to let people know that there are some here that are sort of very specific about their own situation, and the answers of which would take, you know, a lot of time and a lot of questions back and forward with that person in order to give, you know, a really decent answer on those. And some of the others also are more or less, you know, Paul's opinion about, you know, what's happening in China, about precious metals, those sorts of things. And that sort of verges on financial advice, which is not what we're doing here. So I'll just see if there's some others here that I can pick up on. Look, there are some here that where people really don't know where to start. There's quite a few, you know, what is my starting point? You know, what's another one here? What was the key first step you took? You know, there's sort of this thing about they just don't know really where to start in all of this.
The starting place is, in fact, the starting place is a decision. As simple as that may seem, it's actually quite a complex process. So a lot of people have a desire, a lot of people have a wish, a lot of people have a need, a lot of people have you know, some stress and some discomfort and all of those sorts of things, and they would like to you know, have more freedom, or they would like to have more you know, the ability to spend more time with whoever they want to spend with. But they don't then translate that wish or that desire or that like or that need or that want into a committed decision. And until people make a committed decision to start changing their money codes, then those codes can't change. And it does not matter one iota whether somebody else comes along and says how easy it is and how quick you can do it and you know, press button B and hey presto. It is never going to work. It's one of the biggest myths, and it's one of the greatest lies ever told. Everybody has the potential to be more of who they are. And again, you know, everybody has the potential to be the highest and best version of themselves, except culturation doesn't actually want that. Culturation doesn't care, just as long as you're a good servant of the system. And so you have to start with a decision. Now, if you make a decision, then that decision has to be something like, you've now got to go and start the work of learning. And it doesn't matter what medium you start to learn, as long as it matches up with your particular form of or series of cognitive drivers. And so the next stage would be to let's have a look at, you know, your perception and your judgment in the form of what combination have you got that forms your particular genius. Very, very simple process. So once you make a decision, then you've got to determine that you've got to now make investments. You've got to make investments in knowledge. You've got to make investments in time. You've got to make investments in yourself. And that decision has to be met with the determination to get a return on that investment. Now, most people have been working for, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, but they actually haven't got a return, so they're dead flat broke. And so whatever you invest in time and energy and money in terms of your learning, you now have to determine and promise yourself that you will get a return on investment of time and energy and learning. Now, if you can be well supported through that process, then you can do anything that you want. But unless it actually starts with an unconflicted and a committed decision, it will only ever remain as a like or a want or a need or a desire or some sort of dream that hangs out there in cyberspace that's never realized. From that, you then get your genius. From that, we sit down, have conversations, or you can come and do some further learning, and so that we can unfold those conversations between the two of us. And from there, then we plan the next step and the next step and then the next step, because it now has to fit in with who they are, what they're prepared to do, what they're capable of doing at that moment of time, and then expanding their skill set, expanding their knowledge base, expanding their awareness, and supporting them through that process.
And I guess this is perhaps a little bit a sideways sort of comment, but when you were talking, it occurred to me something you said to me a while ago when I said, well, Paul, is there anyone that you really, haven't been able to find that you can help in terms of, improving their financial situation? And you thought about it for a minute and you said, yes, there is one class of people, and those are people who essentially are in toxic relationships.
Yes.
So, I think it's important to talk about support, isn't it?
I have, I have failed on many occasions to bring the best out of people. And it's not for the want of trying, and it's not for any lack of knowledge. But the people that I consistently am unable to help are, again, those people that are not well supported in their own primary relationships, because you end up just basically fighting and trying to pull each other in different directions, and it just doesn't serve anybody. So when I look at working with people, I always offer them as much access to me as they can determine for themselves. But what I'm really looking for is that person well supported? Are they well supported emotionally? Are they well supported intellectually? Are they well supported? So I'm looking for their support structures. Or are they, in some people, like they try and push their partners to come along to me and learn. It's never going to work. Other people are basically in relationships that don't support learning. And any relationship that doesn't support learning, it doesn't matter whether that's in the workplace or whether it's in the family or whether it's in, the primary relationships or whether it's actually in society. Any relationship that does not support learning can only ever support contraction. And there is no in-between space.
Yeah, and that brings up another very related topic, which really hit home to me a while ago at one of your events, where you said, you talked about, Napoleon Hill on his deathbed. There were a couple of things that he mentioned were, the real keys. He distilled all that work down to these success secrets. Yeah. And then down from that, it was two things, and one of those things was the mastermind, but from that, the comment you made, which I found fascinating, is he said, well, everyone already has a mastermind group. That's what you said. Whereas, yes. But it's not the mastermind group you necessarily want. So do you want to speak to that?
And it's really interesting, because that opens up a whole series of things. But you've got to ask the question, well, where do you get your money code from? Okay, now, basically most people's results are like most everybody else's results. Most body, we kind of sort of, we immerse ourselves in particular groups. And we have special parts of our brain, and we have special neurons called mirror neurons. And those mirror neurons are actually designed to emulate the environment that you're actually immersed in. And they bypass the subconscious mind. They're mirror neurons that are specialized for survival. And so basically, whenever you move into an environment, you will adapt and you'll become exactly the same as that environment. And so now, if we apply that to money, then what you do basically, and I think this was Brian Tracy's work, he said, look, basically you look around at your 6 best friends and you understand what their annual income is, and you basically add up that annual income, divide by 5 or divide by 6, and that will be, their answer. That average of your 6 best friends will actually be approximately your financial results. That's because those 5 or 6 people, or the environment that you immerse yourself in, that is in fact your mastermind. That's what your brain is unconsciously downloading. They're the rules that you're keeping. You're keeping the rules that other people are keeping. And if you don't hang around with people who are financially free, but people who are a bit, let's say, financially, let's say, middle of the road, well, then you will always be middle of the road. If you're hanging around with people that are not so well off, then again, they will be your results. So that is, in fact, your mastermind. Now, what we've got to do is get out of that mastermind, to the best of your ability, and connect with or get into the energy orbit of people who have the results that you want. And so in this case, if you want to be financially free, then you've got to determine, that's part of your decision making, isn't it? You've got to determine that literally you want to change your codes, and the fastest way to change your codes is to immerse yourself into the environment of people that have got codes that you want. And when you do that, you're allowing the same mirror neurons to start downloading all of their skill, all of their enterprise, all of their learning, and it's going to happen below the level of conscious awareness. You will emulate and you will become like them. That's what the mastermind is actually all about. And so, again, people may not immediately see that, but it's such a powerful system that's operating within our consciousness and our psyche, and it's based on a survival principle. And so that's how powerful it is. It's part of our survival strategy as mammals, as human beings. So yeah, not well understood.
Absolutely, and obviously, if you're here in Perth, you can come along to events like the one that Paul's having on November 24. There's a link down at the bottom of your page. And you're going to, one of the things you start immediately doing is start hanging out with people who have similar goals and ideas as yourself. So that's one environment. Of course, if you're not in Perth, you can also take advantage of the live cast. There was another question there, and I think you've sort of answered it before, but I think it is worth focusing on again, which is, well, actually, there's some other ones that they're, I don't know, here's one that sort of typifies it. What is the quickest, most efficient, and mentally least challenging way to become a millionaire that still involves me putting in work of about 4 hours per week? So, and from broke to millionaire in 1 year, any thoughts? So these sort of, I guess they're sort of asking about, get rich quick type things in a lot of ways with no work or very little work.
So I'm going to assume that these questions are not tongue-in-cheek, and I'm going to I'll make an observation that they're not necessarily coming from a get-rich-quick mentality, although that's what they may seem. Okay. Now, notwithstanding that, you can't actually do that if you don't have the right codes in place. Okay. So that's a foundational thing. However, if you do have the right codes in place, it's actually quite possible. And so now I've got to go back to those people and let's say engage them in a lot of conversation about whether or not they have those codes into place, or they need to get them in place. And so again, that will determine. But let's go to that sort of first question. It's actually highly possible to do that. But what medium would you actually need? What currency would you actually need to basically use as currency so that you get the $1 million by, having the mentally least challenging, etc., etc., etc.? Well, if you think of just having a brilliant idea and then giving that brilliant idea over to people who could actually materialize and monetize that brilliant idea, then all you've done is the actual creative part of that. And then you surrounded yourself with a team that can now monetize the creativeness of that. So it's highly possible to do that. I mean, we can think of people who have sat around and designed apps, for example. They had a brilliant idea. They went out to an app developer. They didn't actually do any of the work. And then they passed that developer onto, or that app onto somebody who could distribute and monetize that. And so there's a chain processes going on. So if that person has a brilliant idea, then we could facilitate that for him. And what was the second, 0 to a million in a year?
Broke to millionaire in 1 year.
Okay. So again, that's not impossible. But again, it's dependent on what money codes they're actually, got in place. And so consider the example of somebody who already is a multimillionaire, and then through some sort of, let's say global economic crisis, they actually lose their multiple millions of dollars. But because they've actually been there before, and because they actually have the right codes into place, it's not uncommon to hear them coming back and making several more $1 million in a short space of time. And again, there are plenty of examples of that happening. And I'm thinking of Donald Trump, who lost billions and then regenerated his fortune. You can see somebody like Dick Smith, who's regenerating a whole series of Australian cultural icons in the food industry, and he's literally saving companies and businesses and towns from going out the back door because he's come in with a brilliant idea, and he has the skill set and the mindsets and the codes to actually monetize those things. And I think, within 12 months ago, he was about ready to give up because nobody was buying into his idea. And it's only now 12 months later that not only have Australians embraced his whole, the whole Aussie thing, the Aussie jams and Aussie might and all of that sort of stuff, and the turnover is $20 million. And all of those, all of those communities that he's saving and those factories that are no longer shutting down anymore because now he's found employment for them, but the profits actually go to charity. So again, yes, we can make multiple millions. Yes, we can go from broke to millionaire in 12 months, providing you actually have the codes in place. If you do not have the codes in place, then it's going to be a challenge. Now, I didn't have the codes in place when I started, and it took me 3 years and, just over 3.5 years putting those codes in place, but going from dead flat broke to millionaire. But it didn't take me, another 3 years to make the next $1 million. In fact, it came very, very, very quickly, in less than 12 months. And it came in less than 12 months simply because I had those codes in place. One business that I started, I didn't know anything about business. And so, the first year in business was $77,000. But the next year in business was $1.8 million, and the year after that was $3.4 million, simply because I already had the codes in place, and then I was able to make, all the necessary adjustments.
And presumably you were taking into account your own drivers and how you make decisions and those.
And that's why. And again, because I'd already now done it in real estate, so I understood how my mind worked, and I understood how, that had been conditioned, and I only worked with things that were suitable for those. I have ventured out. I've ventured outside that, and whenever I venture outside my particular form of genius, things don't tend to work as well. So
okay,
I have ventured
so you're
out.
Not immune to that. You're not immune to that.
No, I'm not immune to it at all. And again, we venture outside because we want to help other people.
Yeah.
And often that can be, not as fertile as just doing it by yourself.
Yes. Although I have a tendency more to, I guess, work on my own. But on the other hand, you know, there's no question that you can always achieve more. I mean, no one, what is it? No man is an island, you know,
Absolutely.
and certainly not as much fun.
And again, you know, it's about getting the right support for you. You get the wrong support for you, and it doesn't work out so well.
Well, look, we've only got a few minutes left. I'm going to finish at 5:30 Perth time, which should be 8:30 Eastern time. So I've only got a few minutes left. So we haven't had a whole lot of questions asked live. So, but I'm sure Paul would love to answer some. So if you want to submit some more questions, please go ahead. Don't be shy. But there is, and I think we've sort of covered it, but you might want to talk about it generally, is that we sort of have these questions like, you know, day trading, risky or reality to a viable full-time business. And they're sort of like, well, how should I make wealth? You know, how do I develop my business? I work away in remote WA and find it difficult to practice money principles. Can you make any suggestions how I can find financial freedom? What's a good business to get into? There's another one here talking about moving from real estate into a network marketing business, and there's another one here about you know, earning money from home with nil to low startup costs, and also a theme about pursuing things that the people are passionate about. Like there seems to be a bit of a theme there about I'd like to start a business, or I've got something that I'm really passionate about and would love to develop. So I guess we've sort of covered it off in the sense that, well, what you do, the vehicle you use will depend on your cognitive drivers and how you might best be able to do it. But what about this whole thing about passion, or any other comments you might have?
Again, you know, there's a broad cross-section of, you know, those things you just rattled through. But again, it starts with your money code. And so the vehicle, whether it's day trading or whether it's networking or whether it's a business, the vehicle, let's call that the medium, and let's just put it to one side. If you're not working on the codes, then no vehicle will work for you. And what we have to do is observe that of all of the training and all of the information and all of the how-to books and all of the how-to seminars that are around, very few people actually succeed. Because what's happening is that they're mismatching and they're not building new codes. They're just being taught how-to stuff. And so if you just go into the marketplace and think that you can learn how-to stuff, if how-to stuff worked, then we would all be successful, because we all know how to be trim, taught, and terrific. But most people aren't trim, taught, and terrific, nor are the wealthy. So again, it's the codes first, or decision first, then understand your codes, then start to understand your genius and start to match that. Where you live and how you live is not the important thing. The important thing is that you now have to make a decision to go one way or the other way, because a no decision is always a contractionary process. And unless you actually make a decision to expand, what you will end up doing is being talked into something by some slick salesperson, because they're saying that, you know, basically you can do this or that or this or that or this strategy. Now, when you look at and understand that process, you can always point to examples where people do well out of any given strategy, so any given medium. You will always be able to find people that accelerate at that medium, just like running, to use the sporting analogy. You will always find swimmers who are the best. You'll always find runners who are the best. You'll always find weightlifters who can lift the heaviest. Not everybody can actually do that. But of all of the people that attempt to do that, in terms of money, most people do not succeed, because they're not actually building the codes. They're not, you know, working with their particular cognitive drivers, and they're mismatching mediums. And so, again, notwithstanding anything that I've said, then the fastest way is to begin with a decision. Because if you don't have that power to make a decision, then nothing is going to come after it. And if you don't update your codes and change your codes, then it doesn't matter what medium. So decision, codes, understand your cognitive drivers, get some support, get some learning, and don't be in a rush.
Right. So that's
of course,
another.
you've got the codes. Unless, of course, you've got the codes already. Because, if you haven't got the codes, then we've got to put those codes in before we can actually realize the results. So again, the first 50% of game will come in 90% of the time. The second 50% really hits a critical mass where you start to explode, and it comes in 10% of the time. So in my case, the first 50% of gain came in just over 3 years. The next 50% of gain came in just a couple of months.
So I guess if we talk about another metaphor, you plant the seeds, and in this case, let's assume that you plant it in fertile ground, and
Yes.
you water it and you fertilize it, and you don't let the weeds and the birds and the animals get in there and whatever, and you might see a little bit of thing, but it's not until it gets established and takes off. And I see that in my own garden, that you've got to have that patience. And I think you're one of the things you said earlier is that if you are of a particular, and some people are more prone to this than others. If you sort of, then another idea comes up, you tend to go, well, I'm going to go plant some seeds over here, and you're not going to actually wait around for the crop to sort of come up. Yeah.
A great analogy. And one of the things that I ask people is, how long does it take for an avocado tree to produce its fruit? And then they say, 5 years, 8 years. You get various sort of answers, but the answer is actually 1 year. But it takes an avocado tree 7 years to be able to produce its fruit in 1 year. So 7 years is actually becoming a tree.
Yeah.
Once it's the tree, then the fruit, it's now able to bear fruit. And that's exactly what happens with people. And again, if they've got good learning and they've got good support, and all of those stepping stones are actually being put in the right sequence, then there's any amount of potential that they could release from within themselves. And again, people have so much more potential than what maybe even they realize. Again, we need some courage and we need a decision to be able to move forward no matter what. And that's the thing that set me apart, is when I made that decision, I didn't know how to go and create wealth. I mean, I'd been a potter for 15 years. What did I know? But I was so determined, and nothing was going to stop me from. I didn't know how long it would take me. I didn't know the first thing about it. I mean, I'd been 40 years being broke. What did I know? But without that decision and without that ability to understand that I've got to rebuild some codes and then to match for my particular, form of genius, and the rest is now just, the doingness of, growing yourself to the stage where you can actually start to bear the fruit.
So let's first go to that question that guest 886 asked, which is, what's the way to go in buying a house or develop property in the areas closer to Melbourne City?
The real secret to basically any form of real estate is research. And then you've got to think about, what is it that you're seeking to do? Because real estate can have a multiple number of purposes. And so, it can have a rather short-term purpose. It can have a rather long-term purpose. It can be part of an asset portfolio that builds over time. So the very first thing to be clear about is purpose. And the reason why it's really important to be clear, because the purpose that you're going to put real estate to then determines your buying criteria and determines your wealth generating strategies. So, for example, if I wanted to, let's say, extract an enormous amount of cash out of real estate, so it's not going to belong to a buy and hold philosophy. It's not going to belong to a long-term strategy that has me holding on to real estate. So with that in mind, there is always price drivers. So very clear about the purpose and don't mix the two. For example, a lot of people buy a house, live in it, and then they call that an investment. You know, in my book, that doesn't actually work because the strategy is confused. You know, you want it for something to live in and you want it as an investment. The two get collapse and conflate into one. So in any locality, the second thing that's really critical is to understand what the price drivers of that locality is. So, for example, I live in Perth, and Perth has three very, very, very clear price drivers. And so, obviously, one driver of prices is, you know, views of or proximity to the river. Another price driver is views of or proximity to the city. And another price driver is views of or proximity to the coast or the beach. So Melbourne, and where you're thinking about purchasing, will have its own price drivers. And so you must either develop or purchase within those, you know, those areas that are strong price drivers, because if you find yourself outside those areas, then potentially too much development could take place and too much competition. Now, without knowing a little bit more specifically from, is it 886? Then, you know, I can just concentrate on purpose, be very, very clear about what the purpose is, whether you want to, you know, short-term, long-term, be very, very conscious of what the price drivers are, and then develop your strategies and your criteria from that point. And without knowing that, you know, it's difficult to take that answer a little bit further.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Well, look, I'm going to just flick over to Pauline, who has just come onto the call. And you may need to unmute yourself. So we'll just come over to you, Pauline. And if you just say hi, you may need up the top.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, fantastic.
So welcome, Pauline.
Hi, it's nice to be on the call finally. Sorry, technology got the better of me.
Okay, well, not a problem. Perhaps you would like to just then say hi to the people from the Savvy Network who are on here.
Thanks, and look, thanks for everyone for being here. I apologise for being late on the call, but I just couldn't get it to connect through. Just quickly, in light of working with Paul for the last 12 months and have, you know, just been part of his mastermind group and getting fantastic results. So I really wanted to put it out to the Savvy Network and to the people on my list and say, look, come along and have a listen to Paul live and get involved, because he certainly has been getting fantastic results for me and also for, you know, the other people that I've been working with. So thank you, Paul. It's great to be here and it's great to be on the call.
My pleasure, and good to see you.
Let's cover some things, like some of the questions that were sent in before. And the first one is, I'm in debt with 2 properties. How do I get out?
I'm in debt with 2 properties. That's again an answer where I would actually need to ask more questions. You know, exactly what does that mean? So, in the absence of being able to engage that person in a much more detailed way, then think about, well, okay, being in debt with 2 properties is not really what I would call the core issue, because that's a symptom of something. So being in debt with 2 properties is a symptom of what might be more related to a core issue, and the core issue is an inability to actually generate more income or generate more cash flow. So whilst we kind of sort of point to the effect, which is debt with 2 properties, it's actually not the cause. The cause is some money code that's either working in an ineffective way in somebody's head, or a money code that has yet to be developed. And when you start to develop your money codes, then you can start to develop the necessary cash flows that then support whatever borrowings you actually have on the properties, and then it's also important to say, well, what was the purpose of those properties? Because if we turn our attention to the ability to generate, let's say, more income or more cash flow, we can actually get rid of the debt. It's not it's not insurmountable, but it's only insurmountable if you don't actually have the correct money codes in place, because all we're doing is looking at the effect and not knowing how to get around it. But we've got to, really concentrate on what's the core cause of that effect. And for me, it's related to cash flow.
Okay.
Can I just jump in there, Alan and Paul, because that was one of the first questions I think I asked Paul when I first met with him. Was I wanted to sit down with him and kind of lay out everything that I had, my business and my properties, and kind of say to Paul, what would you do in this situation? And how Paul answered that question is very simple, similar to how he just answered it. It was let's look at the money code, let's look at the drivers, let's look at what you're wanting to achieve and all that sort of stuff. And then we can look at it in a different light. So it was really useful for me, having gone in there with wanting to say to him, should I do this or should I do that? It's the learnings that I've had over the 12 months. It's actually, that's not the right question to ask.
Well, yeah. I mean, and again, it's because people have got money codes, and everybody's got a money code. It's just that most people don't exactly know what their money code is.
Yeah.
But and they get into situations where basically you ask a person a question and they'll give you an opinion, or they'll give you what they think you should do, without really asking you, well, where do you want to end up? And if property is a part of that, if property is part of the actual growth medium, and if property is a part of the security, and if property is part of the identity, then let's not concentrate on property. Let's concentrate on how we can actually fund that so that we take the stress off us. And so you're spot on when you point that out.
Well, thanks for that, Paul. And I feel free, Pauline, if you want to jump in at any point.
Yeah, look, I was just going to say the difference between, when I hear Paul speaking, and especially being involved with Paul on a monthly basis, that we go to the mastermind group, so we also have access to Paul a lot. I know whenever I need Paul to talk to him about anything, he's always there at the other end of the phone, or I can go and meet with him. But it's the difference is when Paul talks about it, it doesn't just tell you that you need to change your code. He actually helps you to move into that space where you can and where it does happen. And I think that's been the difference for me, and what I've seen with other people. It's not just a learning as in here's the learning. It's actually he will support you through that so that you actually put it into action as well, and it works. You get the difference there.
And I think that's a really important point. It does me I take no pleasure in just dumping information on people's laps. You could actually read a book and do the same thing, couldn't you?
Yeah.
So, my whole philosophy is to basically build new foundations, new code foundations, and then do the support. And I think that's one of the questions that we had early on, Alan, about, has there been some people that I've been unable to help? And the answer to that is clearly yes. And there is one group of people that I consistently haven't actually found a way to, fully support. And it's those people that are actually in toxic relationships, be it toxic relationships at work, be it toxic relationships at home, be it toxic relationships with family, because what they don't actually have is the the emotional support, the financial support, just even the time space support in order to do the changes that are necessary to take place. And so until they get that space, until they get that support, generally the results will always remain the same.
Yeah, and I guess my comment about all of that, and not talking specifically about you here, Paul, although obviously that's where my example sort of comes from, but as a person who is trying to change their money code, so we have people at home here, and I'm sure they're sort of thinking, well, you know, I wonder if I can do that by myself, or do I need to work with Paul or someone like Paul who can help? And I guess the analogy I would use with that is, or maybe not analogy, but an example is that, you know, you have your money code, you have your way of thinking and operating, and when you're in it, it's very hard to see that you are in it. And so something will come up, and you'll start. Something will happen, and you'll respond in the usual way that you've responded before. But if you don't have someone there to actually identify that and say, "Oh, hold on, remember, this is not what, you know, you're going down this fork in the road, which is your normal fork in the road, but in fact, you've got to go down this other fork, because that's actually, remember, we're going in this different direction for you, where we're actually changing your money code. And if you go down that same fork as before, that'll be the same money code. That's why you've got to go down this one." So I think that there's not really much way around, you know, what I'm saying is I think we all basically need help of one form or another. Otherwise, we're just going to get trapped in our own money code, and we can't really see that. Would that be fair?
Look, I mean, that's absolutely spot on. And, you know, I really like what you just said about, you know, there'll be some people that are wondering whether they can do it by themselves. You know, if I can just share one very, very clear message tonight, and that's the message, is to actually stop wondering, because the answer is no. Stop wondering. The answer is no. And the reason why the answer is no is because if you could have done it by yourself, you would have already done it.
Mm.
If you could do it by yourself, you would already be there. So stop wondering and just reach out, make a decision, get the support that you need, because, you know, we can't stand still. Time is always running out. You know, it's not a renewable resource. And so, you know, people have so much more potential than they allow to come forth for themselves. And if you think about, there is no elite person in any sort of sport, or in any sort of music, or in any sort of performance, or in any sort of, you know, singing or anything like that, that actually doesn't have somebody that sits on the sidelines and basically allows them to understand how to improve their techniques, or how to improve their training, or how to improve their position, or how to open up this, or how to you know, improve the efficiency of a stroke. And again, you know, it's so critically important that we have a model. We have a model for accelerated performance, and that model includes an external observer to the person that's actually doing the performance. And so if we take that model and we just apply it to money, the return on investment is the greatest thing that you could ever give to yourself. That you can't get a better return on investment. You know, there's been some research just recently that's coming out of the States that's saying that mentors are returning, on average, the research is showing that that people are gaining somewhere between a 500 and 800% return on investment for the cost of their mentors. Now, that's huge. You can't actually do that in, you know, let's say a medium that tugs along at, you know, 10% per annum if you're lucky. And so again, you know, the clear message is, if you're wondering about it, there's an absolute fair chance that, and you don't need to be brave, you don't need to be a hero, but just think about, if you could, you already would.
No, that's true. And I mean, we're giving people the opportunity to come along and hear more from you on November 24 here in Perth. We've got a great event, Money Mastery Discovery, Mastering Your Money Code. And that's, as I said, here in Perth. But if you can't make that live, or in person, then there is a live cast using a similar technology to this one, and you're welcome to come along to either of those. I guess the question that I've got another question, and we do have some other questions I want to cover. But Pauline, do you have anything you'd like to ask or comment on there?
No, I will talk in a little bit about that, but I think if you can open up with one of those questions that you've got, that would be really good, and move on from there.
Okay, sure, we'll do. All right. Well, we have our guest 886 back again, and he was asking how to leverage a mortgage broking business. Now, I guess it's a fairly specific question, but do you have any comments about that one, Paul?
Look, the answer is a contextual answer. Without engaging that person, without actually understanding, what that person's particular money codes are, because just imagine for a moment that that person was a multimillionaire, then the answer I'm going to give to that person, simply because I know how advanced his money codes are, is going to be completely different than the answer that I would give to somebody who may be just starting out. And so without, inquiring further into, that person, what is meant by leverage, exactly, how is this business operating? There's a whole bunch of different pieces to the jigsaw puzzle. So to give a sort of an answer off the bat, I can't really give one until I actually know what codes they're operating by. And the other thing that's really, really important is to understand that not only do people have codes in place, every one of us has our own particular form of genius. Now, I know that the word genius is kind of sort of often bandied around with the likes of Einstein, but in fact, every single one of us is actually born with some unique cognitive drivers that are basically unique to us. Now, what often happens is that we get socialized and conditioned out of that uniqueness so that we fit in with the mainstream. But ticking away below the surface are some cognitive drivers that shape the way that a person perceives the world. We call that perception. And not every mind perceives the world the same way. Now, the brain's got to do two functions. It's got to ask the question, what does this mean? And then it's got to make a decision about what this means. And so we have ways of perceiving, and there are 4 unique ways. And then we have ways of making decisions, and there are 4 unique ways out of that. Now, when you put those combinations together, we can end up with 16 unique forms of genius. And each form of genius is suited to some or other mediums for wealth. But not all forms of genius are suitable for other forms of wealth. And if you mismatch, so, people think it's a great idea to, let's say, get into some of the more high-risk forms of wealth creation or money generation because it's seen to be sexy and it's seen to, they're sold, basically anybody can do it. That's a myth. It's not true. It's never been true, and it will never be true, simply because there are some cognitive processes that just won't suit those more aggressive, strategies. And if you've only got to sort of really step back and observe a bit of all of the people that are teaching, of all of the books that are written, of all of the courses that you can buy, all of the webinars, all of the CDs, all the videos you can look at. It's still only a minority that ever get to that position of economic and personal freedom. And the fact is that most people sabotage. Even those who make a decision and they go out, they end up sabotaging in some process. The greatest sabotage comes from mismatching your cognitive drivers to the actual wealth medium itself. And when you line them up, which is what I did when I started out in, not only did I upgrade my codes, I started to say, well, okay, now what particular wealth mediums suit the way that my mind naturally works? When you've got those two things lined up, you've got the best possible opportunities and probabilities of realizing your dreams. If you mismatch them, there's almost no chance.
Yep, that's great, Paul. One of the other things that I guess I see out there, and it's probably related, but I think worth talking about here, is that I'm on the internet all the time. I'm on a lot of lists, and I get a lot of offers all the time from all different people with all sorts of, I guess, effectively money-making ideas for one form or another. And I think that there's this in other words, there are a whole lot of bright, shiny objects being thrown at us all the time by people who, will say, well, you want to go and write a Kindle book today, or you want to do this or do that. I mean, one of the Kindle books is sort of one of the flavours at the moment. Is there a sort of a, comment about that sort of, what you can, I'm not even sure of the question there, but there just seems to be so much for people to choose from. And also when you're thinking about, you talked about the power of mentors, but how do you choose those things? How do you choose a mentor? How do you say, well, that's that's a bright shiny object. It doesn't fit with where I'm at. There seems to just be a lot of noise out there, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely, there's so much noise, and that's actually a good thing, because if we can start from the observation is that there is actually no shortage of ways to make money. So that's very, very clear. But unless you change your money code from, let's say, the worker code to the enterprise code, there is not much chance of actually realizing the potential of any one of those opportunities. If you upgrade the enterprise code to the entrepreneur code, even if it's just being entrepreneurial about yourself, and I'm not referring to entrepreneurs like Richard Branson, although that could be true, but it's about being very, very clear and very, very certain that you are matching your code with your cognitive preferences, well, with your brain's cognitive preferences, even though you may not know what they are. There's a very, very simple test you can take that describes in great detail what they are. So when you match them up, and then you match a medium that is suitable for those codes and those cognitive drivers, then the only thing that's left is basically the development of the skill around the medium. And, we can point to some of the world's greatest achievers if we look at, Warren Buffett. He's very, very clear about, what he does and how he approaches things. And he had a mentor called Benjamin Graham. And, he's often cited as if there was no Benjamin Graham around, would there actually be a Warren Buffett? But Warren Buffett doesn't actually go anywhere near all of those shiny toys or those shiny objects, because again, he's very, very clear about how his mind works, and he's very, very clear about fitting those mediums within his cognitive preferences. And that's exactly what Richard Branson does, and that's exactly what successful people do, is that there are several pieces to the codes, there are several pieces to the jigsaw puzzle, and so you really want a mentor that is available for you. You want a mentor that doesn't actually have a recipe, because there are far too many people that say, well, look, I'll take you on and I'll be your coach, but here's my recipe for you. And that's not working with you. That shows a lack of understanding about how you are personally wired up, what you need to do in order to change your codes, what you need to do in order to develop your mindset. And so that's always an exploration type thing, because you're working with you. It's you that the person that actually needs to change from point A to point B to point C to point D. If you travel too quickly, that's overwhelm. If you travel too slowly, that's underwhelm. And so it's like everything's just got to be right. It's the perfect recipe in the perfect place, but it's not a one size fits all. And so basically you pick somebody that actually has an understanding of how you are wired. You pick somebody that actually has the results that you personally want, and then you get into their energy orbit and use them as a mastermind. Otherwise you're using the status quo as the mastermind, and that's one of the worst things that you can possibly do.
Yeah.
Paul, so you want to say something, Paul?
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things that the last little bit that you did had a lot of things packed into it. But, the part that really resonated for me when I first started working with you was that, my enterprise, I was very, very switched on. So I can see lots and lots of opportunities, which is those bright, shiny objects. And like you, Alan, lots of those come across my path. But Paul helped me to work with my cognitive drivers to look at the things that would actually work for me and to realize that the entrepreneur was the one that held the skill sets to bring some of those things about. And they were things that without Paul's guidance, I would never have seen. So, I think that that's really important. And the cookie cutter model, I have seen so many cookie cutter models where everyone gets that same model and realize that that just doesn't work for people. And to be able to, it's like the question that we had earlier about, should I keep my properties or sell them or what do I do? If Paul was giving a cookie cutter model, he would have an answer for that. But what Paul does work with your cognitive drivers, with your genius, your preferences, and by doing that, you can actually sort it out for yourself if you have that guidance, working with you that way.
Look, just to further that, if I may, Alan, I was speaking with somebody just a couple of days ago, and they actually have what they called a business coach. And now I know that the cognitive driver of this person is as an intuitive. Okay, so we could break down what that actually means on perhaps another call, but I know that what an intuitive does. I know how an intuitive mind actually works, and so this business coach is demanding information. I want this from you. I want this from you. I want this in a nice, tidy little. Give me a 6-word description of blah 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 blah. Now, and then give me your business plan and all of those sorts of things, which in themselves are actually quite valuable. But when you start asking an intuitive those questions, what you end up doing is backing an intuitive into a corner. And they can't tell you because that's not how their mind works. It's not how they perceive the world. And unless the questions change, then the answer that will eventually come is just going to be an answer that gets rid of the bloody question rather than serves the person that's actually being coached. And, yep, sure. Look, if you back them into a corner, they'll come up with a business plan and they'll come up with a nice little 6-word descriptor. But that's the last time they'll ever look at it. And so, again, it's just giving to the coach what the coach is demanding rather than the coach being, really acutely aware of how this particular mind and this particular person and these particular cognitive drivers actually work, and then positioning things for those particular strengths rather than trying to get something from what is actually a weakness.
Thanks, Paul. And look, we've got a great question here from guest 21, which I'll give you in a sec. But I guess I need to sort of say that when I first started working with Paul, I was quite frustrated because I met with him and I said, so I basically was asking him, well, what's your recipe? What's the curriculum? Outline for you your plan for me. Surely you must have, because I'm a pretty linear sort of thinker. So I'm thinking he's got this, and you do this, month 1, and then month 2 you do that, whatever. And of course what Paul describes there is exactly why that doesn't work, and it was also why he works in such a different way, because he basically, needs to start where I am and not try and, put something over me that's some sort of cookie cutter like we talked about. But anyway, look, let's go to guest 21 because it's a good question here because he or she, I'm not sure, says, what's an example of a money code and a medium suitable for this code or cognitive driver? Sort of I guess there's a bit of a, she says, so much jargon. So coming to grips with, because we use this term cognitive driver and it is something that does need to be explained, maybe as I said in a later call, but is there some way to sort of bring it down to give guest 21 an idea of an example?
So let me take as much jargon out of it as I can. So basically, we do have to know something about how the brain works. And so the brain really has 2 functions. One function is to try and understand what information actually means. We're so bombarded with information on a daily basis. So the brain, one of the functions of the brain, it actually has to ask the question, what does this mean? Now, that's a function, that's a cognitive function, so that's a brain function that is pointed towards understanding. Now, it turns out that there are actually two ways that the brain can understand. It can understand by looking forward and basically asking a whole lot of probability questions. Well, it might mean this, it might mean that, it might mean this, it might mean that. I'll speculate, I'll go there and I'll experiment to see if the experiment works out. So that's a forward-looking process. There's another process that is directly opposite to that, and it's a backward-looking process. And it says, well, what's worked in the past? What's real? What's tangible? What's verifiable? What can I take in through my senses? What can I touch, feel, smell, taste? Now, there are two different preferences, and each individual mind will have one of those preferences on board. So it's either going to be a forward-looking thing or it's going to be a backward-looking thing. Now, the easiest way to find out whether you're more backward-orientated or forward-orientated is to simply ask a person to establish a set of goals that they actually want to achieve over the next 12 months. Now, most people who are, let's say, have an orientation of looking back into a tried and proven and reliable and verifiable system can't look forward, so they can't actually create a goal. They can tell you what they don't want, because that's looking backwards. That's a perception. That's a function that actually looks backward. They're very, very clear about what they don't want. When I ask them, but specifically, what do you want instead? They find it very, very difficult to come up with a clear set of goals. Now, if you've got a forward-looking, style about you, it's very, very easy. Well, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. Now, that means that, as a mentor, somebody like me, working with that form of perception that looks forward, I'm going to approach it in an entirely different way as if I'm working with somebody that has a style of perception that actually looks backwards. Now, there are neither right nor wrong, good nor bad, they just are, but it's important that you actually get somebody that works with you and meets you where you're at, because if you try and mix-match them, it's the difference between night and day. They're just different forms of perception. And so in the creation of wealth, or in the development of business, or in the development of enterprise, or in the development of entrepreneurialism, it doesn't matter whether you're pointing it towards many or you're pointing it towards yourself, the real secret is to take your existing strengths and then to multiply and magnify them. The absolute worst thing you can do is work on your weaknesses, because you then pay too much attention to try and fix something that necessarily is not fixable in terms of business and enterprise. If you want to work on personal relationships, of course you work on your weaknesses, not necessarily your strengths. But in business, in wealth generation, you take your existing strengths and you magnify them and multiply them. And so that's why it's really, really important to know, well, okay, so what drives the behavior? So I hope that makes sense.
So is it I guess the second part of Guest 21's question is, what's an example of a money code and a medium suitable for this code? Is it as simple as, like, for example, a person who looks back should do this type of thing versus someone who looks forward should do that type of thing?
So, okay, so I have a particular money code that actually looks forward. And so a forward-looking money code is based on speculation. And so they love speculation. They love trial and error. And so basically, if you think about any of those higher risk type strategies, such as starting up and developing an entrepreneurial business from scratch, that's a real trial and error business, because there's no cookie cutter models for it. For example, if you think about speculative, there's no certainty in the marketplace. You just don't know what the market is going to do one day after another. And so if you don't have a driver that is comfortable with speculation and comfortable with taking risks, then that's not a medium for you, but it is a medium for somebody like me that is more than comfortable. In fact, my type of driver learns by failing. And so we're not afraid to fail. And it's hurry up and get something, because the only way that we get a result is to actually do something, get a result, and then start to adjust the result. And so that's definitely not something that would be suitable for, let's say, a more certain, circumspect type of perception. So what we want to do is then find a medium that's based on reliable data, that's based on reliable information, that's based on a very, very strong track record, that's based on, that relies on what people are doing through their actual buying and living cycle. And so we look at the greatest amount of consumers. Who are they? We can identify them. What are their particular needs at any given time? Then we look at vehicles such as, let's say, real estate, because there's a great deal of research, there's a great deal of track record. But the other thing that's really important is that somebody with, let's say, a more circumspect form of processes, they can work wonderfully well with somebody such as myself, who has a more speculative form of process, because it's the great entrepreneurs, it's the speculators that basically create all the world's greatest changes, all the world's greatest breakthroughs are basically out of those creative, speculative mindsets. But those mindsets are not very good at attending to detail. And often a lot of detail is left out. But a more circumspect mindset or orientation is a great attender to details. And so, basically every great entrepreneur has a great, more circumspect, sphere of influence that are basically going along with them. And so you can actually team up with people. That's why, I love, the mastermind group that I teach, because it's getting different people from different cognitive drivers lining up to create, the sum is greater than the whole sort of thing, or greater than its individual components. And so when you start to line up, and when you're all getting this information, and now you understand who you need to line up with, or whether or not you can actually do it yourself, if you're well supported, that's where the fertility and the real power and the real juice is.
Excellent. Now that's I think that has answered the question, certainly has for me. Pauline, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Oh, I really did. I know Paul's touched a couple of times on the mastermind, but I think, being part of that mastermind group has been, awesome, because you do see how the other cognitive drivers and the people with different perceptions, how they work and how they operate. And, you actually connect with people and can get the parts that you haven't got those needs met by working with others. So I think that's been one of the best things for me, has been working with Paul. And Paul and I are very similar in the way that we operate, but working with yourself, Alan, and that's been great for me, because you actually have the bits that we don't have. And so, they're the sort of things that you learn and get to understand. But previously, I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have known who I was looking for to work with. I think that's what we can find in that mastermind group. So it's just a great environment to be part of.
Okay, great. Well, look, I'm cognizant of the time. We're about 5 minutes after the hour that we said we'd start, but on the other hand, we did start late because of those technical difficulties. So let's continue on for another 10 minutes, and we'll ask some of these original questions, and then we'll wrap up. But before I do that, just I guess to remind people that if they do want to come along and see Paul for a day, he's got an event on November 24, and at the bottom of your screen you'll see that there are links there, and you can either attend live in person, which I would recommend, given that you get to come along to morning and afternoon tea, which is provided. You get the audios afterwards. Paul will be at the morning and afternoon tea, so you can talk to him. You'll be able to obviously associate with other like-minded people. Great event, just $297. And then, if you can't appear live, you can't get along to the Perth event, then we're going to do a live cast using a similar technology to this. So you can attend that way, and that's just $97. So, okay.
So just on that, Alan, to share with people, what I'm actually going to cover on that day is the exact processes and the exact steps that I took when I was actually starting off from dead flat broke. So, you know, the steps that I took and the ability to communicate that and to share all of the ins and outs of those strategies with people, that's all going to be covered on that day, so that when people go away, they've got a very, very clear idea of what mediums and how to position themselves within those mediums, you know, by the end of the day.
Great, because I think that will be very helpful, because certainly looking into the questions, and I missed one back from before from guest 21, who has been very active, which is great, and said, I would like to begin a franchise. Do you have a model for that? And I'm not sure if they mean, you know, they want to start up a franchise, they've got their own idea, or whether they want to buy a franchise. I think it's probably the former rather than the latter. But I guess, again, coming back to those preferences, I would be thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a guess, that someone who wanted to buy an existing franchise and run it would tend to be a backward-looking person, whereas someone who wanted to start their own franchise would probably be more of a forward-looking person.
Absolutely spot on. Absolutely spot on. And when we use the word backwards looking, it's probably not a true statement, because it sounds a bit. But their preference is for reliable and verifiable data, and the only way that you can get that is from the past. You can't get verifiable and reliable data from the future. And so what we're really talking about is the difference between somebody who wants something that's verifiable, reliable, that's tangible, versus somebody that's happy basically, you know, speculating and making up possibilities and then going into the environment to see if those possibilities actually are true.
Okay, great, because guest 21 came back and said, yes, they have an idea and want to start a franchise. So if you were working with someone like that,
yes,
you know, what would be sort of your general, you know, approach?
The first thing I would do is I'd give them a genius test, which is, you know, simply, you know, spending 40 minutes online. And so, you know, with that, then, you know, and this is you know, done through America, so there's a small license fee to pay for taking the test. But once we actually get that test, and then guest 21 will get, you know, a 15-page report, then that 15-page report is going to really set up, well, okay, yes, I know what you want to do, but what cognitive preferences or what drivers are actually in place, and is there a strong match there? If there's a strong match, then we start working on the codes. If there's not a strong match, then we could look at maybe, you know, from that position, we could start putting in different criteria and understanding, well, who else might we need to pull into the mix so that you end up with the best possible of all cases. Now, you know, there's a very, very clear model that you follow in starting up a franchise. And, of course, you know, there's the Franchise Association of Australia. Very, very clear models, very, very, you know, clear procedures, very clear policies. You know, everything that you need to know is you know, can be studied. How you actually go about, you know, what business, and then, you know, getting that to a level of success that you can then model and then, you know, map that out so that other people can basically do it, is a function of, you know, very forward speculative looking process. If those two things line up, then, you know, we're at least now in the ballpark. If they don't, we've got to start looking at other possibilities.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, I think we've probably got time for probably just one more question. Let's see. What is the quickest way to achieve self-understanding?
The quickest way to achieve self-understanding? I would actually have to ask the question, what does that person mean by self-understanding? So, yeah. Is it possible that you can go back?
No, it isn't. But let me actually just. There was another question or a set of questions that we never really addressed, and I think we've just got just enough time to do it. But there's a number of questions were centered around, hey, I'm passionate. I've got a passion about a certain idea, or perhaps it's this concept of, you know, if I follow my passion, then the money will follow. And I guess they're wanting to sort of know about that as a concept. You know, is that part of your thinking when you're advising people about what they're passionate about?
Look, let's. There is this myth. There is absolute myth in the marketplace that says if you follow your passion, the money will come. Now, I don't know about you, Alan, but I've probably never really revealed one of my absolute passions, and you know I would dearly love to monetize it, but I just haven't worked out how. But I'm a real passionate left-handed underwater basket weaver. Now, I've been trying to monetize that for so long, and look, there's nothing wrong with my passion about it. I am totally passionate about that, but there doesn't seem to be a marketplace for my passion. Now, I don't know whether I'm going to run out of time before the money arrives or whether, in fact, it's just not there. So let's just call passion motivation, a motivating force. Now, it is absolute dead set true that if you are doing something with passion, then you are more likely to succeed at it than if you are not doing something with passion. However, we've now got to say, look, what is it that you are passionate about, and is there any evidence that what you are passionate about can be monetized? So can we see other people doing a similar thing and monetizing it because they're passionate about it, or do we actually need to make some adjustments to what you're doing so that you can do what you're passionate about but don't actually direct that at getting money? So I've never stopped my left-handed underwater basket weaving, but I don't try and make money out of it. I make money out of things that the marketplace actually wants and uses, and that have been around since day dot, because that means all I've got to do is get skill sets up and running. And if I can get passionate about skill sets, if I can get passionate about really exchanging value with other human beings, and the more human beings, the better. So we've got to really understand, how do we link passion up to this notion of value? And when we talk about value, we've got to ask, well, who determines value? How is value measured? How is value exchanged? How do I actually increase the value exchange? How can I increase my value so that more people want what I am passionately interested in providing them in a way that actually serves them? So there's a whole bunch of questions. But the myth that just do what you're passionate about and the money will come is actually not true. It may be true in some cases, but it's not true in all cases. Now, somebody like me, it doesn't matter what I do. The thing that drives what I do is pure passion, which means that, I've got a huge amount of energy for sharing with people. I've got a huge amount of energy for learning. I've got a huge amount of energy for exploring that learning. I've got a huge amount of energy for being with people. A huge amount of energy for supporting people through their ups, down, sideways, back to front, left, right, out sort of thing. That's passion. But passion is a motivating force. It's pure energy. It's the highest force next to, let's say, unconditional love. And so when you can just use that as a motivating force and apply it to any medium, you will do far greater. Your results will change far faster and far greater than certainly doing stuff that you're not passionate about, and certainly doing stuff that's not within your cognitive drivers.
And I suspect that when you're doing things that are within your cognitive drivers, you're more likely to be passionate about them because they're going to be within that whole genius. Yeah.
That's well spotted. Absolutely, absolutely. It's just that you may not know because you've never put those two thoughts together yet. Again, when everything is in the line for you, what that's actually called is a flow state. And that was psychologist, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And you know that you're in a flow state when you actually lose track of time. And you only lose track of time because you're actually passionate about something. If you're feeling resistant, you become aware of time, and time drags. when you're doing stuff and you lose a sense of time, time flies and you wonder where it went, and that is pure passion.
Excellent. And out of all that, you can actually pronounce the name of that flow guy. You know, which I think everyone else just goes, "Oh, it's the guy that wrote that flow book." You know.
Haley chick sent me Haley.
Yeah, well, there we go. All right. Well, look, I think we do need to wrap up. We're basically.
Do I get brownie points if I spell it?
Yeah, probably. Maybe some other time. I don't know if we've got enough time for you to spell it. It's been long enough. But anyway. All right. Well, look, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Pauline, and thank you everyone who came on to the call. Guest 21 has said, awesome. Thanks heaps. Glad we were able to. Paul was able to help you, and I hope everyone else got a lot of value from the call. As I said, love to see you along here in Perth or on that live cast on the November 24. The links are at the bottom of this page. So again, thanks everyone, and we'll hopefully catch you on another call some other time. Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.